I would say today's borders don't work without technology. It's actually essential for them to. And I think one of the most obvious point about the borders is then the use of databases, which has been created around the borders. And I think particularly in the evolution of the genesis of the European border regime, you get, this is when you get to the first European databases. So you have the Schengen information system already in 1995. You get Eurodac pretty easy. Now you have the visa information system, for example, and of course now you have an institution which is interesting because it's a European agency, EU Visa, and it's designed to maintain all these databases, because before that was organized privately by private companies, and they actually took it away from private companies and said this is apparently so central that it needs to be organized by the state, and then or by the European Union, and then they have tasked that agency also with creating interoperability, because if you want biometric data, for example, which the Schengen information system in the beginning didn't have, and it's not standardized really. If you look at the biometric markers, you can take them like this or take them like this to make them matchable, to make them comparable. Suddenly you need to put a lot of effort, and that's all happening, I think, in this agency.
Yeah, and for the last few years, I don't know, 4 or 5, I don't know if you remember, they have also this new European program of smart borders, so more intelligent databases. So they have the problem of interoperability and connectivity of these new intelligent databases, but also what it needs to be done with the old databases. Should their content be uploaded into other ones? And this also gives way to huge European program of research, which you can have in the research directorate or in the industry directorate. And some researchers are pretty happy to keep into that, and whatever you can discuss with them, saying, are you really you really know what this is going to be used for? And then you say, well, this is a question of database theory, of connectivity, or whatever, and blah blah.
What I always find very interesting about logistics is this whole tracking aspect, which comes in, you know, with this, there's these RFID chips, which I think for the first time they're cheap, they're passive, so you don't need to put, they don't need to have their own energy source, and you can just slap it onto everything. And supposedly you should be able to track your shoe from China probably until the shop and further. And this is what this whole tracking mechanism starts. And that's, I think, what comes in a similar way with these databases, the border, and especially with the biometric markers, because they kind of allow to establish this identity that you can see. So you can use the visa information system to see that this person applied for a visa before. You can use the Schengen information system to understand if it has been involved in. Because Schengen information system is a criminal database, and then of course you have Eurodac to track.
The print.
Yes, and I think this is something which is a bit overlapping. This notion of tracking and being able to find people in this respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also this, I come back, it's not exactly the databases, but this is what I find interesting in the forensic oceanography thing that I was talking yesterday about, which was the way they used all this tracking mechanism and this control mechanism and this surveillance mechanism, using all the data, not to stop, but then to make the state and the armies accountable for the death or for the what happened to the migrants. And, but it would be good if we could use the data inside the database, but I'm not sure we can.
The paper trail,
yeah, unless we have armies of activist hackers.
I had this friend of mine, she was looking into biometrics a lot, and she said there's this one peculiarity which I have in like in fingerprinting, is that you cannot generate a unique identifier from a fingerprint. Because of course that would be the dream. You can kind of take the fingerprint and it condenses into a long string of numbers and characters, and you know it's kind of unique, and possibly you might also be able to go back. So, but since you have this problem, you always need to store the reference fingerprint somewhere, and not this unique identifier, which would be like a, I don't know, a social security number or something like this. So there she argues you have a kind of inbuilt one-way anonymization procedure, which you could also use to, not to track people, but for people to kind of authorize themselves access to healthcare, for example. But the fingerprint proves that they're entitled to healthcare, for example, but it doesn't reveal the identity per se. It's more the question, are you authorized or not? And then becomes, of course, a different question. Why are some people entitled to something or not? But at least it's not so strongly connected with an identity where you can attach a nationality to, or like a specific legal category. Kind of that might fall away.
No, what I get from your question is also that the borders are no more at a geographical place. Huh? They are internal, external. I always remember that Mezzadra brought it up when we did an interview with him from this fantastic movie Machete, where the guy says, we did not cross the border crossed us. So there's this kind of movement, and also the fact that with the externalization process, which has been implemented in 2004, which is the way that the European Union passes agreements with countries way outside of Europe. The European borders are south of Morocco, south of Libya, now south of Sudan, Eritrea. So I don't know if I answer your question, but that was also, Europe is the territory, that it brings also another quote by Borges, who says, I don't know if you say it in English, la carte n'est pas le territoire, the map is not the territory. It's about this story of the emperor of China who wanted to have the most exact map of his territory. So he had a map of his palace and of his town, and then the final map occupied the whole of the land, and he came to the conclusion that the map is not the territory.
So you have this very strong effort of the European Union as part of the externalization, because usually we understand externalization as you bring third countries into the fold of participating in the migration control project. But it's also about erecting new borders in Africa, for example. And in Mali, the European Union funded this project to have biometric passports for all the Malian citizens. Yeah. And of course, I mean, these biometric markers, they only make sense if you have them in a database again. And okay, I don't want to spin the huge conspiracy theory that it's all about connecting all these databases, but this is definitely a direction where it's going. So if you have increased capabilities of checking identities and the attached status on the inside, I guess something that also applies to the outside. So yes, it blurs the borders.
Yeah, but even the internal borders, can be not temporary, but they can be raised. For example, okay, there's a freedom of movement inside the Schengen space, but whenever there are political issues, the Schengen system is how do you say, lifted. For example, when there were demonstrations, it was closed between France and Italy, and it was closed between France and other countries.
I mean, for these mapping efforts of the European Union, you have this quite for some time, I would say. I think it kind of came with the border at the point in around 2005, especially with the Ceuta and Melilla, when they kind of realized that, okay, the model that the Siva represented, where you say you have a hardened border, you have some capability to look ahead, like to the outside, but okay, just towards Morocco, for example, but not even to the territory of Morocco, just like to see what boats are leaving. This is what the Siva does. And I think from the 2000s on, this is kind of the model of border technology. You know, we make hardened borders, better surveillance capabilities, we can react faster.
Yeah.
And then you get to 2005, and you have in October Ceuta and Melilla, when suddenly hundreds of migrants that have been camped around these two Spanish exclaves on the Moroccan or African continent suddenly cross the 3-meter fences. And you can detect, if you read the policy papers, you get an immediate reaction from the European Council. There's this meeting in Hampton Court in, I think, October or November 2005. And you see this shift where they say, okay, this thing, it can't be decided at the border. We need to be able to look ahead way further. And then you get this problem that if you want, you cannot kind of see the whole territory. So suddenly you get this obsession with the routes. That they start to say, we have to identify different routes. So you get the West African route. This is from Senegal to the Canary Islands, and you get the Central Mediterranean route.
And then you have the Horn of Africa. So this is what all this. I was talking yesterday about the Italian Migration Compact, and this is what it's all about, identifying the main routes and then offering money to the states to block the routes. So, and this has been going from the Valletta Summit, then first there was the Khartoum process which began, then the Valletta Summit, and everything was about stopping the smuggling and allowing the migrants not to be threatened by smugglers. And then there was the EU-Turkey agreement last year, March 18, 2016. And then this migration compact, which probably soon is going to be a model for the European Union, which is a compact, even the vocabulary means something. And we take everything and we compact it in, and it's something else than the externalization agreements of before, because they are not even saying we need to help you develop your human rights capacities and things like that. They say we offer you money, and then you do the things, you strengthen the borders, and you keep the migrants in detention, and the routes are very precisely, as Bernd was saying, identified. Central Africa, the Horn of Africa, Sudan, not yet Eritrea, but why not? Nigeria, Mali.
But we also sometimes we discuss this obsession with roots in a different setting, because I think the problem of externalization is, and it even exists inside Europe, is how do you get all these countries to cooperate?
Yeah.
And the first thing I think you need to do is you need to tell them you have a problem. Like, okay, to be honest, the European Union has to say we have a problem. We would like you to have the same problem. But of course, I mean, why would Libya say, yes, we see that this problem of yours is our problem? So what do you need to do? You need to create some kind of vocabulary to be able to speak about it. And I think these maps which depict the routes, they are kind of a visual vocabulary, because you can see, can you see how migration is cutting through your national territory? You know, you are also somehow affected. If you can frame it in terms of border security, of course, it makes a lot of sense. But yes, the focus on the routes is also to create kind of a common space of problematization, and then you can start talking. So let's address this together, since you and I are affected.
I'm in the same boat, and so we need to address it, and I will lend you money, I will give you money to solve your problem. But it's even a question of, I'm not a scholar and I'm not into geography, but I work a lot with cartographers in the Migrant Network, and there are some of them critical cartographers who are addressing the way that many maps, and even maps which are widely acclaimed by activists, migrant activists, but are threatening maps, because if you use those very straight arrows, you have the impression of an invasion. So these also are the kind of maps that are used to say, look, you have a problem because the arrow goes through your country, and so these cartographers are thinking about ways to develop conceptual maps that use different pictorial models and not to convey this idea of invasion, tsunami, floods, as we said yesterday. Also, this hydraulic vocabulary is particularly horrifying because there's no subjectivity, there's no agency, and it's just a flow, and then you turn the tap, and then when you need it, you open it. I was in Madrid on the day they abandoned Plaza del Sol to go in the district, and it was very impressive. And I remember I was talking with a young activist with an H, which was at Patio de Maravillas, which was this logistics center of web, radio, paper, journal, everything. He said, hey, Kinsem, it's just like peer-to-peer. You need to go everywhere to distribute between every location.
It's
and
interesting that
fantastic enough.
you invoke the network metaphor, because I was also thinking about something, because okay, now if you talk about Greece and Spain, this is something still a bit national, even if it's focused on the cities, but the activism, I think, which came around the Balkan route, between Greece or even further, Turkey, up until Scandinavia, like the networks you suddenly had between northern port cities and cities like Malmö in Sweden or something, so very direct connections. So it worked along the route. It didn't work on that level of, we have to create a national organization which is big. No, we just need, we need to connect the different strings. We need somebody, we need to connect between Budapest, Hungary and Munich. Okay, then it's a different passage, because then the German state kind of jumped in, but then to exit from Germany again, you need to build up connections. And I think this is a different model, and it's not the model which kind of the right wing suggests to us, let's go back to the nation state, but it's also not the model that the European Union suggests, which says let's just form a supranational, huge, unified entity. But we are back to the connection, so perhaps we have our own little obsession with the roots, but out of necessity and out of concrete solidarity.
I completely agree with what Bernd said about traveling across the routes, and going back to your paper, going back to the routes, which you categorize as visibility rather than corridors, which were invisibility. To make the connections and to have our own network. And I don't know, for example, one of the most fantastic activists I met these last years is a no border guy who comes from Paris, and then he went to Nantes to Notre-Dame-des-Landes, and then after he came to Calais, and now he's between Calais and Vintimille, but he also goes to Rome, and he keeps the contact with the migrants, and he put the people in contact, and I think that's one way also to consider what can be done.
I mean, I think this is the crucial question, because you referred to the European Social Forum process and the Basanito network, and this is what we need to answer in the end. How can we be politically active in a European space without being? We have to find our own form to deal with this continent, and I think what that definitely includes, or this is one of the most important parts, we can't stop at the borders of Europe. So we need to be able to have some kind of connection to North Africa, to Turkey.
The situation is not the same for the activists, the economic situation is not the same, the migration policy, the border regime, the whole of the situation is not the same, of course, but we need to find another way to occupy the space and to make connections. You're completely right on this.
I think it's about understanding how to deal with the heterogeneity and the temporal mismatch which you often have, and which is, I think, this is why it's a counterexample to the European Union process, because it's much more about homogenizing, and even if it's all the declarations about diversity, it's in the end, there's still some kind of idea of homogeneity. And we're learning to deal with heterogeneity,
Yeah,
so that it is not a problem.
that's a good conclusion. Huh?
Yes.